Hello and welcome to Phoenix Women, my new podcast of inspiring stories of rising up from the ashes, hearing how women have overcome difficulties and challenges in their lives and stepped fully into their fiery selves. Hello, I am Jane Mary, and I am here today to share my own Phoenix Women story, telling you how I have risen from the ashes of challenges within my own life to where I am today. Before I start this episode and for all the other episodes, the intention is that stories are shared for inspiration and to support you. If there is anything that comes up that you find upsetting or activates you, I ask you and invite you to just check in with yourself and give yourself what you need. Have a little break, journal, go for a walk, speak to someone you trust, and really nurture yourself with what you need. And then you can come back to the podcast later or be in touch if anything comes up. Another disclaimer is that there may be swearing in this podcast. So if you've got young children around, maybe just check in with listening to it at a good time for you. So welcome. I am Jane Mary. I'll do a little introduction about me in case you don't know about me. And I will share a little bit about my Phoenix story today. So I'm Jane Mary. I am a shamanic practitioner. I'm a women's empowerment and pleasure coach. I'm an energy healer and Reiki master or Reiki mama. And I am a mother of three. I am based on the Wales, England border between Mid Wales, Powys and Shropshire. And I work within this area as well as online. Is there anything else I need to share? No? So why have I started this podcast? I've started this podcast because I feel like there's some really useful ways. I feel like we always need to know how we can resource ourselves. And I think one of the greatest ways we can heal ourselves and support ourselves is actually hearing other people's stories, because it builds a connection. It builds a web of connection between us, and we realize we're not on our own. Many of us are going through things that everyone else doesn't know about, and a lot of us keep that to ourselves, and it weighs heavy. So this podcast aims to support you with ideas and inspiration of how other people, other women have gone through difficulties and how they've overcome them and navigated them to step fully into their fiery selves. So I'm going to have a little breath for a moment and have a little drink, and then I'll start with one of my stories. So, as I've said, I'm Jane. There's so much to choose from. I feel like we all go through different Phoenix stories through our life, whether they're small or big. But I'm going to start today probably from my first pregnancy. So my eldest child is nearly 22. And I had her when I was in my late teens, when I was 18. And this was obviously at a time before social media really hit. So it was quite an isolated time. And of course, my peers weren't having babies, and I lived in a place away from a lot of my family. So it was a really challenging time. However, I was in a really loving relationship and still am. And we kind of went with the flow and embraced our beautiful surprise bundle that was our daughter. What followed was a few years of the treadmill. So our daughter was born quite poorly, and she has complex needs and disabilities. And I remember when I was pregnant, I remember speaking to my best friend, and I was upset because all the things that I thought I was going to be doing in the next 10 years, 20 years, kind of went out the window, and I was like, oh my goodness, my life's over. I'm a teenage mum, and I was feeling all the prejudice out there that there was at the time regarding teenage pregnancies and things. And my friend just said to me, she goes, why is your life over? You can still do it all. And of course, I tried to do it all. So I we created a wonderful home. I went and did uni. I trained as a primary school teacher. I started work. My partner and I, we chose to get married. We had a wonderful wedding, and life was great. Our daughter had lots of needs going on, but I think I filled up my life with work and just trying to do it all. And I remember I didn't really rest. Life was busy. And actually having our daughter so young, and I had a traumatic birth with her, and the years that followed were actually, looking back, and everything that I experienced it was extremely traumatic. But I didn't have the resources to support myself or really fully understand what was going on with my body and how I was responding to everything. So I got to my late 20s, and I was working, and my daughter was getting poorly. She was getting quite poorly every day. And my body kept giving me signs to slow down and to stop, but I just overrode them. And I was still going to work. I was starting to get quite poorly, and I was still going to work. And I was at a point where I just couldn't rest. I couldn't relax. My body was frazzled. And it got to the point where my body made me stop. And I had burnout. I completely crashed. This came at the time of my late 20s, so my Saturn return. And, at the time it was horrific. It was horrendous. But thank goodness it happened because it was like an enormous wake-up call. And it was like a clearing. I was rock bottom. And it was like I had to rebuild myself from the very bottom. And it was like starting with, like a clean slate. Which in itself was quite scary and petrifying because I was going into something new and unknown. When you're having to create something new, I had to step away from all the things that held me and supported me that were familiar to me. So the first thing I did was I had to really surrender. I had, at the time when I had burnout, I had a virus, like a glandular fever virus, and so it really affected my throat. And then from that, because I didn't surrender and rest enough at the time, my body just it completely enveloped my body, and I had to completely stop. I really struggled to walk. I could barely do the stairs. And to get up out of bed in the morning, my legs were just like a heavy lead weight. Even to hold a cup of tea, I'd struggle to do that. So I had to really surrender. And that was probably the hardest thing, actually. I had to surrender to it. And over time, I had to create an acceptance. And I resisted that acceptance that I wasn't who I was, which was hard because I was very active. I was always out walking or running, and I was very sporty. And suddenly my body, I felt like an 80-year-old woman. My body hurt and my joints ached. So I had to find a new way, and I had to grieve who I was. And one of the things when I was feeling so poorly and very low, while also still caring for my eldest daughter, one of the things that I kept visualizing and feeling that I really wanted to do was to be on a mountaintop. And that was, I kind of planted that was my long-term thing that I really wanted to do. At this time, I needed help getting out the bath. I couldn't even get out the bath on my own. And even I couldn't go out for a walk. I'd get too tired. If I went out for a walk, I'd have to sleep for days. So the chronic fatigue that I had, it's not like a tiredness. It's completely absorbs every ounce of your being and your thinking process, and it's complete disconnection from everything. So how did I get from there to here? So I think one of the first things I did was I asked for help. I couldn't do this on my own, and I started to ask for help from the doctors. And I remember the doctor saying, reminding me, I think the first time I went to see them, and they kind of said, well, you're not a machine. And as ridiculous as that sounds now, that was a shock to me, because I actually thought I didn't need to rest. I thought, yeah, I've got this. I can do all of this. I think I was living in such a patriarchal way of living that I didn't believe I needed to rest. So that was actually a massive wake-up call to me, which, like, what are we now, 14, 15 years later? I mean, resting, that is my favourite thing to do. So I've kind of gone the opposite way now. So yeah, I asked for help. One of the things I did was I joined a course for chronic fatigue and chronic pain. And that was actually a real massive turning point. And the one thing that I took from there was learning to pace myself. I really discovered how to chunk my life into small bits so that I didn't have to feel overwhelmed, or it helped to reduce the brain fog, and I could slowly start to rebuild myself. Another thing that I learned was about consistency, and it didn't have to be so consistency in my lifestyle, really. So I very, very slowly started to rebuild with very slow, consistent movement, and very slow, consistent practices every day. I knew that I wouldn't wave a magic wand and I would be back to who I was. I knew that I couldn't change anything. My daughter was still very poorly at the time, and I knew that I had to prioritize myself to support my daughter. She was needing more and more support. So I had to start taking myself really seriously. So I really started to pace myself, and I started to prioritize myself, which at the first I found very hard because I had really low self-esteem. So I had to find ways to build myself up so that I believed I deserved to prioritize myself. I started to heal my stories and my life experiences. So things that, the stories that play over in your mind, or experiences that have happened that you tried to kind of hold down and suppress, they were coming up louder and louder. And so I found different ways of meeting them. So I did lots of journaling, and I also did lots of reading. I wasn't able to go to lots of different things at the time. It was a very quiet space. I had a few years of spending a lot of time on my own. And within that time, I would sit out in the garden. When I started to rebuild and have more energy, I had a tiny, tiny little vegetable patch in my garden. And that was my sanctuary. If I'd had a really hard day, if my daughter had been quite poorly that day, or if I had really struggled to do anything that day, I would just spend 10 minutes in that garden in my little, well, it was probably like 1 meter by 2 meters, in my back garden. And I'd just have a little potter there, just having a little chat with the vegetables that were growing, a little bit of, picking out the weeds, or just being out there. That was a real sanctuary. And I really started then to notice my connection to my garden and the trees and the earth. And I started to pay attention to how I was feeling in different places. Another thing that I did then, as I started to rebuild myself, I started to notice that more opportunities were coming up. And I think when we are in a place of really rock bottom, we don't really have anywhere to go other than with where we are. And part of that is having a mirror and really looking at ourselves and seeing ourselves. So I really started to become very reflective. And I really started to look at my own mindset and how I was feeling. So one of the things that I did which was actually hugely transitional and massively supportive at the time, was I started to be more present in the moment. I suppose mindfulness, isn't it? But I started to be really mindful in moments that were really challenging. So we were having some really, at home life was very challenging at the time. My daughter was very poorly. And what I did was dig really deep. So in those moments when perhaps my daughter was really struggling and really poorly, and I was having a really hard day, what I would do, I would dig really deep for the things that were good. Now, I'm not a spiritual bypasser. I'm not into toxic positivity. But what I do find is that if you can find something in any moment that you can find an essence of feeling good, and feeling grateful for that, I feel like that can expand. It's the age-old like attracts like, isn't it? But I do also feel like think it's very important to meet where you are. So in these moments that were actually pretty shit, they were really it was a dark time, and there didn't really seem to be an answer to supporting my daughter, or and I was getting input, and I was just getting really tired all the time. So what I did was dug really deep, and in those moments that were really challenging and hard, I would look for things that I would be grateful for. So, I'm really grateful right now that everybody is safe. I'm really grateful right now that I have a hot cup of tea to drink. I'm really grateful right now that the sun is creating such a beautiful shadow on the wall. I'm really grateful for the beautiful colour of the leaves outside as they turn in the autumn air. It was bringing it back to real simplicity. And what it did, it helped me with managing my response in challenging situations at home, because I was allowing myself to have a break. And my body kind of softened in those moments. I noticed that my body softened. I could have space to breathe. I could just relax a moment. And I didn't have to face all the challenges of the world all the time. I remember one of the things that when I went on the chronic fatigue and chronic pain course, I remember the woman who was running it saying that you didn't have to be thinking all of the time, which was revolutionary to me, because I was a teacher. So teachers generally have every minute planned of the day. And then if they haven't, if they're not thinking about that, they're reflecting on the day, or they're planning the day, the next day. So, she said, if you're just washing up, just be present and think about washing up. If you're just sitting and having a rest, just take 10 seconds of closing your eyes and not thinking about anything. Maybe even expand it to 30 seconds or a minute, just sitting there with your eyes closed. If you're at your work, at your desk, maybe not if you're driving right now, but if you're wherever you are, just take a few seconds, just having your eyes closed and taking some breaths with your eyes closed, not thinking about anything. I started to introduce that idea into my everyday. And I would particularly do it when I was outside. And as I did it, I started to feel a deeper connection to my garden, my lovely little veggie patch, but also to myself. I was devoting that time to myself and to that little patch of earth that I had in my garden. I also realised around this time that I was quite sensitive to energy. I'd always been a bit confused about why I would randomly feel different things in different situations that didn't really make sense to me. Why I suddenly would feel like ecstatically happy, and the next minute I'd go somewhere else and I felt really drained and exhausted. So it was around this time that I realised that I was a highly sensitive person, that I was an intuitive empath. And this was massively life-changing, actually, because I'd always had this feeling or belief or been told that to be sensitive was a weakness. And I'm a really emotional person. I cry when I'm happy, I'm cry when I'm sad, I'm cry when I'm excited, you know. So to have this realization that you know, I was highly sensitive was like, oh, okay, right, well, that's me. So this idea of, you know, being rock bottom, what it's done is helped me rebuild myself. And along the way, I discovered who I was, really. So understanding how energy sensitive I was, what I did from that, I learned how to, well, I went out to seek and I asked for and started to find opportunities where I could learn to create protection. I could learn about how important boundaries were, not only physical or emotional, but like energetic boundaries as well. And I think the realization of being an energy sensitive and finding places that I could talk quite openly in safer places, safer spaces, really helped to shift shame around all of this. And that was enormous. So finding places where I could rest and speak truthfully and honestly without worrying that I was putting on other people. And this is where women's circles came in massively in my life. I think my first circle that I went to was one that I didn't really realize it was a circle. It was a yoga class that I went to. And it wasn't, I hadn't really been to yoga before, but the teacher, who is a gorgeous dear friend now, she really saw everybody in that class, and it was a lovely small group, and we were set up the yoga mats in a circle, and before we started, we all had a moment just to kind of check in with how we are. She'd check in with us, and so that really was my first taste of the power of circle, where you had space to actually say how you're feeling without worrying about what anyone else, how they receive it. Very often I find if you're with your loved ones, there might be some resistance to say how you feel, because you don't want to upset the other person, or you don't want them to worry, or you don't want them to be concerned. And that completely makes sense. So I think it's really important. One thing I found, and probably I would say that's massively important in shifting shame and supporting ourselves, is to find places where we can be free to be ourselves. I think that was the biggest thing I found in rising from, you know, the darkness, and I'd say like the lackluster of myself. I wasn't in connection with who I was. And I think from the burnout, from the crash, and rising up I kind of made myself rise up. I went out, I asked for help, and I got some help in different places, but I knew deep down that the help I really needed had to come from within. I had to give it to myself. Everything that I'd held out and thought I was unworthy of and didn't deserve, I made a conscious decision to give it to myself and prioritize myself. And along the way, I have gained incredible relationships and friendships. And I reached that mountaintop in 2015. I reached the top of Snowdon, and that was the first biggest mountain that I got up to after my crash in 15 years ago. So yeah, I had that little long-term goal. I took little baby steps consistently towards it, and I reached the top quite well, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So advice I would give for anyone who is maybe in that rock bottom or in that darkness, or maybe you're treading through the flames, advice I would give is to really take some space to connect to your true self. So finding spaces where you can actually be, you can kind of drop your shoulders, you can breathe out, let your belly breathe out as well. Somewhere, whether you're witnessed, whether it's in a circle, whether it's with friends, or whether you're just witnessed by nature, find somewhere that you can just be yourself. Go out into the woods, go into the fields, go into a park, or maybe buy some herbs and just plant them on your, put them on your kitchen windowsill. Just have some connection to some earth, to nature, and kind of build a relationship there and speak openly and vulnerably, because it's within the vulnerability when we shed the layers of stories that we carry about ourselves and beliefs that we have about ourselves that aren't necessarily true. It's within these places that we can find that little nugget of gold and those little flames that help us to rise. So I feel like I'm getting to the end a little bit now. So that's part of my Phoenix story. Over some other episodes, I'll share some other aspects of Phoenix rising stories that I have risen up from. So if you want to find out more about the work that I do, you can find me at janemary.co.uk. And you can find links there to my social media. I am Jane Mary. But if there's anything here that's resonated with you, if you feel like it's maybe activated a bit, just check in with yourself, give yourself what you need, have some water, get some fresh air, have a little dance break, a bit of a move, and just check in with what do you deserve. Prioritize yourself and fill yourself up. Okay, thank you very much for being here and for listening. And I look forward to connecting with you again on our next episode. Much love.